but I believe that since my life began, the most I have was just a talent to amuse.
Hello, Rachel.
Hello, David.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Yes, I'm very eager because between you and I, we're going to make some good theatrical history for the folks out there who were not alive probably in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So.
For sure. And unfortunately, I couldn't make it to your Las Vegas home where you have an amazing collection of Judy Garland memorabilia. But fortunately, we were still able to arrange this phone call. Okay, so to start out, one of the things that we both have in common is that we have both lived in Chicago at one point, and so I'm curious about your time living there. So can you tell me a little bit about what your experience there was?
Well, when I arrived in Chicago in the early 60s, I was a young kid who just left Cuba after Castro took over in 1959, and I was 2 years in a boarding school in Florida, and then 1 year in West Virginia, and then I arrived in Chicago. My parents were there already, and I finished my junior and senior year of high school at Nicholas Senn High School, SENN, and from there I went 1.5 years to junior college. Now, being a teenager, when the hormones are their best, I was not actually out because although in Chicago being gay in that time was supposed to be legal, but no marriage. But most people were sort of apprehensive. So during the evenings, later on, when I found out there were different kind of bars, because I was a dancer professionally, I got to perform in both gay and straight nightclubs, dancing as a guy, jazz dancing and mambos and all kinds of beautiful routines. But then a hairdresser, I always forget his name, who was known in Chicago, because at that time, after I graduated from halfway from junior college, I became a hairdresser. I went to the American School of Beauty Culture, which was at that time one of the best schools for cosmetology in Chicago. Well, anyway, this hairdresser who worked near the apartment my parents and I lived, one day he came out, he says, Eri, that's my real name, Heri, because David the Alba became my stage name later on in my life when I was in San Francisco. He said, Eri, I would like to make you up. I have an idea who you look like. Would you like to come to my home? So I went to his home, and he made me up. He says, you look like Judy Garland. Would you like to perform like her? I said, well, it's very difficult to sing like Judy. He says, no, all you have to do is to buy a record. In those days, we had vinyl records, no CDs or all the things we have nowadays. And he said, and just sing over her voice like a duet. So my grandmother, who was a very good seamstress, she made some costumes patterned after Judy, and I got to perform at a very well-known bar in Chicago called the Chesterfield Club, which was filled with all kinds of people, women and all kinds of people, because they had a drag show there. Now, originally, I performed there as a boy dancing, but then when I told the guy in charge of the show that I wanted to do Judy, because Judy was the in thing among the gay people in Chicago at that time, during the 60s, I became a hit immediately doing Judy. Nobody else was doing Judy, so they called me the male Judy Garland from then on. So I got to do even TV spots, which I wish they were taped so we could see them nowadays, but I don't know what happened to those. So I had a very wonderful time in Chicago performing. In my school, some of the girls, I got them on the side to do a dance routine, and we went to the McCormick Boys Club. They were having some kind of, I don't know, like an audition type to give awards. And I won with them a second place award by the Coca-Cola company. I had the trophy at home. And the first person who won the award got to perform at the, I think it was the McErie Crown Theater, one of those places. Anyway, so that was fun. So my Chicago time was interesting because my parents got my grandmother and grandfather and my aunt took out from Cuba. So we moved from different apartments until my parents bought a house. And that's the best I can tell about Chicago. I played the Aragon Ballroom. So to me, the 60s was very, well, I was very young, and I got to meet the great Judy Garland, too. So that was, this is a whole story in itself, how I got to get to talk to Judy. And eventually, when she died, that's when I started collecting more and more and more. And eventually, this grand memorabilia has come into like a mini museum here at my home. But I have very fond memories of Chicago. I didn't care for the horrible winters and the wind and the snow. Yeah. But when you're young, I remember I used to take the subway and take a suitcase and walk 10 blocks in the horrible snow to do TV shows at the Latin American cable TV station. Something I would never do nowadays, but, but that part of the coldness I never liked. But otherwise, Chicago was fun because I got to meet some wonderful lady. I was a hairdresser. I had some wonderful customers that liked my work. I did a lot of creative work with them. So I have very good memories of my teenage years in Chicago.
That's wonderful. And did you know a lot about Judy Garland prior to going to that hairstylist?
I knew who Judy Garland was in Cuba because they played her movies subbed in Spanish. And then there was a very famous, I know they still open, record shop called Rosa's. I forgot what street, I think Wabash, I forgot, it's so many years ago. And I used to, and when this hairdresser told me you should do Judy, I went to start buying records and records. So I started buying a lot of her recordings. And then because she was doing a lot of TV appearances, I got to see her on TV, and then I got to see her 3 times live. So I did get acquainted with Judy during the 60s. And somebody asked me, why were you so impressed? I said, well, because you see this tiny woman delivering the song with such emphasis and so much strength and love, and see the audience, especially some of the gay boys, screaming, "Love you, we love you, Judy, we love you, Judy." And she would say, "I love you back." For me, it was like an instant impact. Being a teenager, seeing this kind of love affair between a performer and the audience. So I will never forget, as long as I live, this kind of, like Judy would call, a marriage between the audience and the performer. And I got to see many performers after she died in my lifetime because of my show business career. But of all the people I've seen, and I've seen the best, she's the one that impressed me most. So that should answer you about Judy.
Yeah. I can't even imagine what it would have been like to actually see her live, because I'm obviously quite young, and so I'll never get to know what that's like, but it's really interesting to hear about.
Yeah, because, when you see somebody, even when I perform or anybody I know, and you see yourself on TV or videos later, you can appreciate a performance. But when you are actually in the theater and you see the person live and you see the audience coming in, there's something about the moment of being live that when you film it, is gone. Doesn't matter if you see the people standing up and give you flowers. It's already a film. It's not right there where you can see the vibrations going from people, from human to human. So it's something that to this moment I can feel it. Sometimes when I walk through my memorabilia, I said to Judy spiritually, I said, my goodness, I was so lucky to have met you in person. And I know when I go over the rainbow, I'll get to see you. And I said to Judy, meanwhile, Lord Judy, all the beautiful things I have kept through the years in your legacy, which I do. It's a lovely legacy I have of her here.
That's
anyway.
Really, that's great, and that's really wonderful, and I 100% agree about the difference between like getting to see something on film versus in real life. But I noticed, so in the 1960s you were a teenager performing, and so entertainment is not a super common career path, and so to go into it so young, that might have been kind of a nerve-wracking experience. So I'm wondering, did you have any fears or reservations about going into entertainment? And if you did, how did you overcome any fear about it?
Well, the thing that's peculiar, and this applies to other performers, I'm really a shy person. If I go to a restaurant, unless somebody smiles at me and says hello, I don't go out of my way to say, hi, how are you? Because I don't know what kind of reaction I'm going to get. But somehow, because I always like performing, when I got to be on the stage, I had no fear. The only fear I had later on in my life was because I had to memorize a lot of songs, complicated songs, was that I would forget the words when I'm singing. But other than that fear of forgetting words, I was never afraid of an audience. In fact, I look forward for that moment because it's like a rush. And of course, when you're young and handsome, everybody wants you. So I didn't feel rejected. If I applied for a job, dancing, oh yes, Mr. Ari, why don't you come this weekend and do, So I got to perform, and people were very receptive. So to me, and of course, looking at Judy perform, I remember I went back to the same theater, it was called the Chicago Opera House, next day, and I said to the old guy at the entrance, may I come inside, please? I would love to walk on the stage where Judy Garland sat last night. And this guy, I was no threat to him. He said, okay. So he let me in, and I walked on that stage, and I said to myself, my goodness, what a feeling to be on this stage looking at the audience. So that experience carried me over and over through the years, especially when I got to work at the world-famous Finocchio Club, in which a lot of famous movie stars came almost every week to see the show. So I had never been like now. I'm not at loss of words because I know the answers to most of the questions because I lived them. Lived them through shows, or some of the anecdotes I have are experiences of being with people in the business and reactions. So to me, it's almost like a natural talk, anything that has to deal with the show business aspect of my life. And the same thing applies to my hairdressing career because I did very well as a hairdresser. I got to groom a lot of local celebrities' wigs when I was in San Francisco. So that was another. Somebody said to me, well, if you had to choose between show business or hairdressing, I said, well, obviously show business, you get applause, and you can be on the stage. When you do hairdressing, you do get applause because people say to you afterwards, like in my case, oh, I enjoyed the way you did my hair, and you get compliments, but it's not the same as when you perform. But I did enjoy hairdressing, which I use as a backup career because if you depend on show business, it's a very unstable career. Even when you get to be very famous, sometimes you have no scripts coming and no jobs, and you have to be like, so I didn't want to be, that way. So I sort of kept safe by having two careers going at the same time.
Yeah, and I'm sure that, the hairdressing really helped you out with the show business career as well, with like styling wigs and other hair and that kind of thing.
Yeah, doing the wigs, and because some of the women said, "Oh, can you do my hairdo like Marilyn Monroe?" So I would bleach her hair, and I would try to do, some people would say, "Can you do?" I had pictures in my shop in San Francisco of different movie stars. So a lot of people say, "Can you do a hairdo like this, like Elizabeth Taylor and whatever?" So I incorporated certain theatrics into my manual work of doing the hair. So sure, I have a lot of wonderful memories of people telling me, this sounds rather macabre, but a lady I used to do her hair, she says, "Will you do a wig for a lady we know that passed away?" I said, "Well, I'm not going to do somebody's hair that's dead." She said, "No, her wig." So I did the wig, and this customer of mine, she says, "She looks so beautiful in the coffin with the hairstyle you did her." I said, "Oh my God, thank you so much." So even that struck a happy note that I tried to make somebody look good even when they were dead. So when people went by the casket, it sounds very macabre, but this happened. They said she looked very nice. But other than that, my hair worked like a Finocchio's when I did the wigs. Most of the people in the cast, I did their wigs, and they would announce, "This is hairdo that Mr. De Alba did for me," So that was a good feeling to see my hair do's on the stage parading through these people's acts, So that was good.
Yeah, and so obviously, the hair was a useful skill, but what are maybe some useful skills or characteristics for being a singer impressionist that maybe people would be surprised to learn about? Like maybe something that you wouldn't expect to be a helpful skill to have?
Well, in my case, I can explain. I inherited, at Finocchio's at that time, you had to sing live and look real. You couldn't look like a guy in drag. So I was young and pretty in my 20s. I had very smooth skin, nice looking eyes and smile, small hands. So when I came out in drag on the stage, I didn't look like a guy in drag. I looked real. And then, because my voice never did change very deep, I could sing very high notes. Not quite like a soprano, but pretty high notes. And then I would do these lovely songs in English and Spanish, because Mrs. Finocchio used to say to me, "Make sure that you sing a lot of Latin songs, because we have a lot of Latin American audiences coming from all over, South America and Central America and so on, and Spain." So I would sing in Spanish. But then she said, "I want you to also sing in English so the American people will understand you." And then once in a while, and that's when my act at Finocchio's was developed into the name Boy Chick, which was what my late partner told me. We better give your Latin act a name. So when they announced me, they would say David De Alba as Boy Chick. Then when Liza became famous because of cabaret, although Miss Finocchio didn't like impersonations of movie stars, she wanted you to be yourself on the stage. She allowed me to do Liza's songs like Cabaret and New York, New York. And then because she knew Mrs. Finocchio, she was one of the owners, that I was known for Judy, she said, "Okay, once in a while you can do Judy too, but I want you to be yourself." So I got to do impersonations of Judy live with a live band this time, of Liza and as Boy Chick in Spanish. So I had a lot of songs to memorize in English and Spanish. And thank God I never forgot the words, but I was always terrified because sometimes we had like 500 people sitting in that nightclub. I thought, "Oh my God, what happens if I make a mistake?" But that's what I call singing impressionist, because I was actually acting a part, singing as myself, but dressed in the opposite direction of being a boy, looking like a female.
Yeah, and
So,
did you have a preference for, like, was there a character that you preferred being for, so like, for example, did you prefer doing the Judy Garland impression, or did you prefer performing as Boy Chick?
well, how can I say? I always liked Judy Garland because anytime I did Judy, especially when I did concerts here in Las Vegas, I would attract a Judy Garland fan base who were very in love with Judy. So anything I would do, it was just explosive. I also enjoy doing my Latin American act, which was based on a late singer from Cuba who was my dear friend. Her name was Olga Chorens, Chorens. And I enjoy it because being from Cuba, it's easier for me to sing in Spanish than in English because I don't have to worry about the accent. So I did enjoy, yes, singing in Spanish as Boy Chick, but I also enjoyed a lot doing Judy because although I know I never could sound like Judy, the impersonation was done in such a nice way that some of the hair customers of mine would say to me, David, we saw Judy in the movie the other day, and we thought of you immediately because you resemble her. So it was nice that people did appreciate that I did resemble her, and especially because I was able to see Judy in person. So it was not just looking at her at the movie. I was able to see how she looked and how she reacted in person. So when I did her, I pulled back my teenage years in my head and said, okay, remember what you saw on the stage, do it now. So that's the best way I can tell you. I do, I enjoy both acts, really.
Yeah, and so we were talking earlier about how the female impersonation back then, it wasn't like drag is today. And so I'm sure there were some very specific techniques to do that. And so was there anyone who was a mentor to you who helped you with this? Or kind of on the flip side, were you ever a mentor to anyone else?
Well, my mentor, I didn't technically have a mentor because my mentor, not to be in drag, but to perform, were actually Judy, indirectly, and Olga from Cuba, because I imitated both ladies. But when I got to Finocchio's, I met a very wonderful Cuban performer who's dead now many years. His name was Bobby De Castro, and he gave me a lot of points. He would say to me, David, when you get up on the stage, don't just stand on one side. Just move here and there and back and forth so everybody gets to see you. And he said, and a very important advice for you, never look at the men when you're singing in drag. Look at the women. Because if you have the woman on your side, she will make her husband on your side. But if you look at the men, then the woman gets very mad because they think you're going to try to hit on the guy. I said, really? So I took that advice and I would sing, the women, and then the women would say, oh, honey. Then sometimes the men came backstage and said, oh, I wish you could teach my wife how to do her makeup and so on. But I learned that to always please the women, because if they were pleased, if the men came, because, a lot of times women drag the men to ballets and to operas, and the men hate it. They don't like it. But they want to please the wife or the girlfriend. So that was a very good advice. And, of course, I also learned, although I was a very good hairdresser, I learned the craft in Chicago. I learned certain techniques about wigs that the impersonators did at Finocchio's, how to make it look more real looking so it wouldn't look like a wig. And the thing about the difference between now and then, although people don't want to hear that, but this is history now. When I was working at Finocchio's, Mrs. Finocchio used to say to us, in my nightclub, all of you are professional female impersonators. you are not drag queens and do not act like them. Because at that time, nowadays, the young performers, they like to call themselves drag queens. At that time, it was considered not a very nice word because means a queen meant a man who is feminine, who is doing female. So it was like a put down. So in her club, she wanted us to look as real as possible. So the hairdos were done like a real showgirl would be done in Las Vegas, but not like this huge wigs that these guys wear nowadays, and the eye makeup that looks, I'm sorry, they look like Martians. Our eye makeup was done with false lashes and everything, but to look more like the stars of Hollywood of yesteryear, people that you're too young to know, but Hedy Lamarr, Lana Turner, women like that. So we try to look as real as possible. And that's the message then. Nowadays it's different because the more bizarre you look, the better. But at that time, we never did that. And I'm glad we didn't because people would say in the audience, especially the day I was off and I would hear, honey, that cannot be a guy. He looks too real. Yes, he is. Look over here. Look at the way he moves. People were observing us like a doctor looking at a patient, So that's the difference between then and now. And of course, the great difference too was that at Finocchio's, Finocchio was known all over the world because everybody had to sing live or dance or do comedy, but always live, no lip syncing. That was the motto from there. Nowadays, there's a few drag performers who sing live, but most of them have to lip sync to a recording. That's the difference between then and now. We had a subculture in those days. They call us pioneers because it was not, you couldn't see people in drag walking on the street or holding hands, whatever. So they had to go to Finocchio's or certain spots in New York, like the 82 Club or the famous Jewel Box Review to see men in drag. It was not something that you could see in everyday life. So it was something almost forbidden. So when they came to see us, they was, oh my God. Nowadays, it's so common that I'm sure if we did a show at Finocchio, people say, oh, why it's a big deal? Down the street, I know a guy who lives in drag. So nowadays, it wouldn't be such a shock. But in the 60s, yes, and the 70s, it was sort of shocking,
Yeah, and that kind of answers my next question about kind of the attitudes of the general public towards female impersonation back then. Because nowadays, of course, there are like TV shows for drag and there are big fan bases around it. But back then, it was kind of less accepted.
Yeah, when they came, I said to the boys in the show, to them we look like freaks. Because you don't see a guy dressed as a girl in Oklahoma or Ohio. I said, but they clapped and they enjoy it because they thought, oh my God, especially because some of the boys at the end of the performance will take the wig off or will drop their voices to a baritone to make people feel at ease, saying, oh, that's a guy in drag, So, but the audiences really didn't come in a hostile attitude. They came to see something that is like in Las Vegas when they used to come to see the showgirls naked here with the feathers on their head. They only could see that in Las Vegas. Nowadays, they don't have those things anymore, like the Follies Bergier and so on. So to the audiences then, it was something actually new, although drag has been around for even before I was born, but in clubs like that, it was sort of, Finocchio's was the only real, they had a few gay clubs that had drags, but the only legitimate club in San Francisco for 63 years was because, and it proved it because a lot of famous people came to see the show. Tony Curtis, Lucille Ball, Frank Sinatra, and Marilyn Monroe, the list goes, I can go on forever. Phyllis Diller, John Rivers, and the list went on and on and on of people, famous that came, Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood. It was just incredible to see the amount of famous people that came to see our show. Sometimes every week, or at least every 2 weeks, there was somebody famous sitting in the audience.
That's amazing. And I remember I was reading a little bit about Finocchio's, and I was really impressed at the list of celebrities that had all gone there, because it wasn't what I would have expected.
Well, I guess the word got out that, first of all, Finocchio's was a straight club. It was not a gay club. So if a certain celebrity came and they saw a lot of straight people, they wouldn't be afraid to be caught by the media people saying, "Oh, we saw so-and-so in a gay club," because at that time it still was sort of shone upon, because some of them were in the closet, some of these famous people. But because the word got out that Finocchio was famous, people like Carol Channing, all those people, when they came to San Francisco to do their own shows, they came on their day off to see us. So it became very common to have famous people come in before my time and during my time, which I found fascinating. Most of them are dead now. I don't think that any of them are alive. The ones that came to see us, unfortunately. No, there's 2 or 3 alive still. They are very old now, but most of them are gone. Although Robert Wagner is alive, and he was there. So still some,
So kind of shifting to the perspective of from the audience to the actual performers, what was the dynamic and kind of like the relationships among the performers at Finocchio's? Like, did they usually get along, or were they butting heads, or?
Well, when I left Chicago, and they told me, you should apply to work at Finocchio's, the word among the impersonators in Chicago about Finocchio's was a rather strange label. They call it the House of Hate, and also the Elephant's Burial Ground. And I said, what do you mean with that? I was very naive. Well, the House of Hate, because some of the performers were catty against each other, okay? And why was it called the Burial Ground? Well, because this was very nice. Mr. and Mrs. Finocchio would allow performers in their 60s to work on the stage either as comedians or singing. They would hire older acts, not just young kids in their 20s and 30s. Now, when I was there, I was very lucky to have found people like Bobby De Castro from Cuba, a wonderful act, René De Carlo from Mexico, the international dancing star, my wonderful friend who's dead now, Laverne Cummings, who was supposed to be the star of the show, Elton Paris, who was a black American jazz singer. But some of the other acts, they'll remain nameless, they were very nasty to me, because if they didn't like something, they would do a nasty remark. But I knew about the House of Hate, so I just sort of said, okay, this comes with the territory. Now, Mrs. Finocchio, there was a choreographer, Joe Noble, who invented to create what they call the Finocchio Events in honor of Mrs. Eve Finocchio. So when they created the events, it was a chorus line that became sort of a hard thing to swallow, because no matter what the events would do, Mrs. Finocchio saw them as her babies, because they were named after her. So if any of the events would not behave, they would say to me backstage, David, we can get away with murder, and you can't, because we are an event. I say, yes, I know that. But once in a while, Mr. Finocchio would get mad with some of the vets and scold them and say, listen, you better pick up your gowns correctly because Mr. Finocchio and I, we have a very expensive bill paying for all these dirty costumes, and we cannot afford this. So she would get mad with them once in a while, but most of the time, they were her babies. So you couldn't talk against the vets because if you do, you'll be in trouble. Now, some of the vets were excellent dancers, like Rene De Carlo and Bobby De Castro, and another, I'm trying to think of it, Reggie Dahl, very beautiful boy. But some of them were higher because they looked pretty. They were Asian guys who looked very pretty as females, and they were higher because they looked pretty, not because they were talented. So you had a contrast of some that were pretty and not very talented, and some that were very talented and still looked nice, although they were not chickens. They were in their 40s or 50s, but they looked very pretty, and they were excellent dancers. But that was the idea. Some people... So I was very lucky that when I left, I kept in touch with Carol Wallace and Elton Paris, because Bobby De Castro had died already, and Laverne. So I did have some friends. And the ones who were nasty, well, most of them are dead now anyway, so I don't have to worry about it. So that was what happened then.
Why do you think it was that some of the people there weren't very nice? Do you think it was just maybe because they felt like they could get away with it, or was something else going on?
Well, some people in any job, there's in every career, you have people who are jealous of other people either because they don't have the talent you have, or whatever, and they just have nasty dispositions. And there's nothing you can do because I tried to be nice to those who were not nice to me. And, let me give you an example. Because I don't like to talk about the dead, but Laurie Shannon was an excellent showman. And he was on the show All in the Family 3 times. He got a role called Beverly LaSalle. He got the part. Anyway, so he was performing at Finocchio's, and after he came from Los Angeles from filming, I said to him, congratulations, he did a wonderful job on All in the Family. He said, yes, I was very good. He didn't bother to say thank you. And any time I would try to do a new song, he would be sort of sarcastic, and nasty. He never liked me. I don't know why, because I was never Mother Teresa, a saint, but I was never an instigator because I was the only child, and I never knew what hate was. I went to do my job, but I didn't realize that some people didn't like what you did, because if you got more applause or you got somebody to say bravo in the audience, the person who was not liking you didn't like it. But this is when you work in a review. Now, if you work as a solo artist, as I did later on, there's no problem. But when you're working in a review with many people, there's always somebody who is not going to be nice to you. This applies, I'm sure, to even some of the dancers in Las Vegas when they dance in reviews, like male dancers or female dancers. I'm sure they have the same kind of intrigue. It was not just Finocchio's. This is something that happens, unfortunately, among people who get, jealous of because you are better looking, or you have more talent, or you get more applause, whatever the reason is. They don't like you, and they will despise you. And there's nothing you can do to revert it, So I just play along and say, okay, I have to do, if I want to remain here, it's best to keep doing the best I can and forget about these people, because if you get nervous thinking you're being criticized by some people in the cast, you'll never get up on the stage. You'll be terrified. So I tried to put it back in my mind, which was not easy, but I did it. But generally speaking, the ones who liked me and vice versa, we had a very good friendship on stage and off stage, because we would get together to go to eat at Chinatown, or we would go to see shows that day we were off, concerts and so on. So the ones that got along with me and vice versa, we did get along very well. That was good.
Yeah. Do you feel like Finocchio's earned its name or was deserving of the name House of Hate, or do you feel like the positive interactions that you had with people outweighed the negative?
Well, the House of Hate was called also because of this reason, which I'll tell you. Some of the performers would call Mrs. Finocchio early in the morning, like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. Hello, Mrs. Finocchio. I wanted to tell you what happened last night. So they would tell her sometimes lies about me or whoever else they wanted to talk about. So one day I said to Miss Finocchio, and I didn't talk to her very much on the phone because I didn't like to call her. I said to her, Miss Finocchio, why do you listen to these people criticizing any of us? And she said, David, dear, I listen to them, but I listen to only what I want to listen to. I said, yes, I know, ma'am, but even if you listen to a little thing, they never tell you something constructive like David did this last night or Laverne did this last night or whoever. They will always criticize me or whoever else to make you feel against me. So this is what I call the House of Hate. For her to allow these people to call her to give her gossip, because she only came to the nightclub on Saturday night. The nightclub was run by her sister, very nice lady, Maria Filippis. And she ran the club, the cashier part. But Mr. and Miss Finocchio came always on Saturday night. And sometimes they came on Sunday. So Miss Finocchio enjoyed hearing from some of the performers this kind of gossip. Laverne and Carol Wallace used to tell me, we never called, but we know some of them called her. So this is why the House of Hate was not very good. But if they were alive and the club was going, I could go to work now, although I'm not 20 anymore, because they always like an older act to be on the stage. So that part of the Elephant's Burial Ground, I think, was nice. But you cannot all of a sudden say, oh, everything was perfect. Just like at MGM, poor Judy, some of the things that, the cruelty that went against her, if you read the books about Judy and MGM, was almost the same thing as that kind of instigation. People calling Mr. Mayor and say, oh, Judy's eating too much, she's going to get fat, Judy's doing this, to get Judy in trouble. The same thing that happened at MGM, but on a smaller scale, happened at Finocchio's. And the reason what happened is because Mr. Finocchio used to say, we have hundreds of people writing to us every month who want to work for us. And singers are dime a dozen. So with this kind of fear tactic, one would say, I better be careful, because if it's true that so many people are applying for a job, we could be out of a job anytime. And this happens even here too in Las Vegas. I'm sure some of the male dancers in the Chippendales, they have the younger kids coming in applying. So some of the ones who are, let's say somebody's 21 years old and somebody's 30 on the stage, he will be afraid that the 20-year-old can bump him off the stage because he's younger. So that kind of technique. But then Laverne Cummins, who was the star of the show, he would say to Miss Finocchio, so where are all these singers, Mr. Finocchio? And Miss Finocchio didn't answer him. And the reason why was very few guys could sing as a female, in a female-type voice. A lot of guys in drag may look pretty, but when they open their mouth, their voices sounded like males singing. So they didn't fit the bill. So when Laverne says, where are all these men that you're talking about? He didn't answer, because it's true. Laverne had a very beautiful voice, and mine was very real too. So that helped, that we sounded real and not like a guy in drag. So I hope that answered the best way I can.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, even today, I think like in Hollywood, in like the TV shows and movies, on the surface, it seems like everything's kind of perfect, and then underneath there can be a lot of drama or a lot of bad things happening. So it's interesting to
Show
hear
business is very competitive, and because even when you're very, very famous, it's hard to become famous. But once you become famous, to retain your fame for year after year after year is very, very difficult. Judy was lucky because when the movie career ended, she did recordings and she did concerts, and people went to see her. But if you didn't sing, and your career ended because, let's say, you were like Marilyn Monroe. Well, she died when she was in her 30s, but if Marilyn became older, she wouldn't be a sex symbol. So then she wouldn't get parts. So that's the problem with Hollywood. If you don't look very young, now in the old days of MGM, they had older actresses who played grandmothers and play aunts and so on, but they were like supporting actresses. The real actress, once became old, that was the end because they couldn't play lovers anymore. Now the same thing happens here in Las Vegas. I'm sure a lot of these dancers, because they're young, once they hit in their late 40s, unless they keep their bodies in perfect shape, they're out of a job. If you're a singer and your voice holds and you have a following, then you can extend your career. Look at Dolly Parton, how old she is, and how people love her, So there's some examples, but how many can you say are like Dolly Parton that are older and have a big following? Very few.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of speaking of celebrities and the people that you worked with, I want to talk a little bit about the celebrity interviews on your website, because I was reading some of those, and it's really interesting to be able to read those, especially because some of the people that you interviewed, there's not a lot of other information out there about them. And so one of the people I noticed that you interviewed was Holly White. And so because there's so little information out there about her, I wanted to know, do you know anything about her current whereabouts or what she's been up to?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. When I heard you wanted me to talk about Holly White, I have her phone number. She lives in Hawaii. I said, I hope she's alive because, you never know. We haven't talked for a long time. So I called her and left a message, and she called me back. Hi, David, how are you? Oh, my God, Holly, I'm going to do an interview, and I'm going to talk about you. Really? I said, yes, well, Holly was one of the prettiest boys in drag that I have ever seen. He would just take a wig without any teasing and put it on his head at Finocchio's into a flip. Put a little bit of powder, tiny lashes, and lipstick. While everybody else was made up heavy for the stage, Holly looked so real when he came out doing a striptease with blue feathers, and he would sing when the Red Robin come Bobby along. He would sing 2 or 3 songs. He looked gorgeous. I never forget after the show, if Holly would laugh, he would take each finger and put her under his eyes, holding the skin under the eyes. I said, what are you doing? He says, I don't want to get laugh lines. I said, oh, really? So he was so pretty that even after the show was over and he walked out as a guy, he went beyond that. And at that time in the 70s, he went for the complete, what they called then, a sex change. Having a sex change, he could not work at Finocchio's because you had to be a boy. So Holly left for Europe, I think it was Germany and Paris, and worked in nightclubs where they also had females that did a striptease and so on. we kept in touch through the years here and there. And then in 2004, when my partner was still alive, Paul Reiner, he says, let's go to Hawaii. And then I went to Hawaii. I got to meet Holly after not seeing Holly since the 1970s, and that was 2004. So we got to be with Holly for 2 days talking and so on. I said, listen, I have an interview section on my website. I'm going to interview you. Well, Holly, to this day, I said, you should be ashamed. She doesn't have a computer like me. So we had to do the interviews via snail mail, questions and answers, because she didn't have I said, why don't you have a computer? Even I am not that mechanically inclined. I know how to write an email. So anyway, I wrote an interview, and I'm glad I did, because Paul used to say to me, let's interview people who have never had that many interviews, so to give them some kind of light to their name. And sadly, by the time I did the interview series, people like Carol Wallace and Bobby Castro from Finocchio, they were dead. And I wish we could have done that before, but by the time we were in San Francisco, the internet wasn't even around. I could have gotten a lot of wonderful anecdotes from these performers, but when they died, along with them, all the stories died. This is why I like to do interviews, because as long as I'm alive, I can tell people the stories, my own anecdotes, or around the people that I work with. I want to keep those people alive through me in the best light possible. And Holly is one of those examples. So I said, Holly, because she used to travel to Paris, and she said, I don't travel anymore. I stay in Hawaii because she has family there. I said, so I guess I'll never get to see you in person again on this earth. I said, because if you don't travel, even, so, but she's alive and doing fine in Hawaii.
That's really great to hear. And I'm really grateful for all of the interviews that you did. Even though there were some people that maybe you didn't get the chance to interview, it's still really nice to be able to look back on the interviews that are there and the information that is still available. So I was really, really grateful to be able to find an interview with her, because I saw some of her pictures and I was really amazed at just how beautiful she was, or how beautiful she still is. And I wanted to hear what she had to say.
And I even told Holly, what happened to your costume? She said, oh, some of them got lost. I said, I know you have some beautiful costumes from Finocchio. Just a lot of times, I guess people will, I got robbed before, not at Finocchio, but when I was working in Chicago, I got robbed at a nightclub of some beautiful costumes and wigs. So I guess when she was traveling, some of them got torn or lost. So I said, I wish I had one of your costumes for my memorabilia at home. She said, no, I don't have anything anymore, David. So I guess what a pity. In fact, she doesn't have many pictures of her. I said, what happened to your pictures? Don't you carry an album like I did, So we had trouble even getting those pictures for the interview we gave her then.
Well, fortunately, it was still able to work out in the end. But I guess to go back to Finocchio's, or just performing in general, what was your favorite memory from performing or of being at Finocchio's?
Well, one of the favorite memories, for example, there's an anecdote I told about during the 70s or 80s. I think it was the early 80s. The chicken, the Colonel Sanders chicken, they had a promotion that if you bought their chicken, they would give you a free strawberry pie. So that particular day, I went to Polk Street in San Francisco to buy some chicken, and they said, I'm sorry, but we're out of strawberry pies. We'll give you a rain check. So that night, I was working at Finocchio's, and I was doing a special act. I still have it, the beautiful boa around me. And I said to the audience, do you like my feathers? And they clapped. I said, these are the remnants from the chickens from Kentucky Fried. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you what happened today. So most people knew about the commercial. So I went there, and they told me, we have no pies. And Cubans, we love desserts. At that time, I was very thin, so I said, but we love desserts. So at the back of the nightclub, Colonel Sanders was there. He stood up. He looked like a ghost apparition dressed in white. And he said, boy, if you ever come to Tennessee, I'll give you not one, but 2 or 3 strawberry pies for free. And he sat down. I didn't know he was there. So next day, Herb Caen was a famous columnist. He wrote that Colonel Sanders was a Finocchio, and so on. I told the MC, Carol Wallace, who was my friend, I said, Carol, you cannot buy this kind of publicity to have Colonel Sanders be at the same time and talking about the pies and the chicken. So I did the same act every night, almost every night, and I got applause, but he was not there to get up and do that. That's one favorite memory. Another favorite memory, I was doing a very complicated French medley in tribute to Edith Piaf and Josephine Baker. Both were chanteuses, singers that were very famous in Paris, France. So after that particular night, of all nights, they had a French tour sitting around the perimeter of the stage. And these guys and gals, they had little berets on. And when I did my beautiful medley, they were clapping and so happy and so happy. And I left the stage, and I see this old guy with a beret and a cane. Mr. De Alba, please wait a second. I said, yes, sir, may I help you? He says, Miss Edith Piaf will be all smiles in heaven. I said, oh, thank you so much. And I said, may I ask you who you are? And he says, I used to play the piano for Miss Piaf. I said to Carol Wallace, the MC, can you imagine this? I sang a medley about Edith Piaf and her. I'm sure he was one of her many pianists in Paris. I said, this guy who played the piano for her saw me. So those are 2 memories I will never forget. I can go on with more, but those are very vivid because this happened. And in those days, you couldn't take the Buenos Cellular phones to take videos of these moments. Those moments were lost in time. But in my mind, I can still feel and see what happened. So there's other very good memories too, but those 2 stand out, as coming,
Those are both such incredible coincidences that they were both there at just the right time.
That's right, then, the right time. Now, I'll tell you a story that doesn't belong to me, but before my time, during the 60s, when Marilyn Monroe was doing a movie called The Misfits in Reno, she heard that there was an impersonator, I always forget his name because I never met him, who was impersonating her as Finocchio. So I heard from the MCs that at a particular night comes in Marilyn Monroe with a black wig on and dark glasses to see this guy do her act on the stage. And of all times, is to show you bad timing. That impersonator, who also did a takeoff on Rita Hayworth, he did Rita Hayworth instead of Marilyn. So Marilyn left, and they told him, Marilyn was here to see, why didn't you tell me? I was told that. Why didn't you tell me? I would have done Marilyn. So to his bad luck, and to Marilyn, the night she went to Finocchio's, the guy who was supposed to impersonate her was doing somebody else's act, So that's bad timing. Imagine that, now, talking about good timing, Olga, the famous Cuban singer, which I got to meet not only in Cuba as a little boy, in Havana, but later on in Miami with her famous husband, Tony Alvarez. Through the years, she knew I impersonated her, so I did perform in Miami for them during the 80s at nightclubs where they were performing. When she got older, she and her husband died. She had a radio show until last year when she died. And she offered me 2 years ago a beautiful certificate award saying that David de Alba impersonates me very well, and a few words in English. And then she signed Olga Chorenz. This was, I take it back, 7 years ago because Paul was alive then. And Paul says to me, my partner, aren't you lucky, David, to have Olga give you an award for doing her act? Because how many Elvis impersonators here in Las Vegas would have loved having the real Elvis give them a certificate award saying, thank you for impersonating me so well, Elvis. I say, yes, Paul, I'm very lucky to have Olga give me the award, So that's another thing that when I walk by and I see that she died last year, I say, oh my God, it hurts me because I have some of her. I only have Judy, but I also have some things that Olga sent me when she was alive. So I would keep memories of her, like beautiful brooches and earrings and things, and two ties that belong to her husband, because she knew I have this memorabilia. So she wanted me to have something of them, of theirs too. So that's something I keep in my heart with a fond memory, to have this kind of, indirect applause from the person that you loved for so many years and I impersonated as Boychik.
That's really incredible to be able to have met your idols in real life and to have that kind of connection with them.
Now with Judy, she never got to see me perform, but I did get to talk. It's a long story. I got to talk to her, and I said during my talk to her, Judy, I do impersonations of you. And she said, do you like me that much? I said, yes, of course. I said, well, I'm doing a show tomorrow here in Chicago. And she said, I would love to see you, dear, but I have to go on tour. I have to leave Chicago tomorrow. And 8 months later, she passed away. We talked a little bit more, but I'm just telling you, I did get to tell Judy that I did impersonations of her. And she said, I would love to see you. I guess she did see me from the other side of the rainbow. When I did impersonations of her from the other side, she could see me as a spirit. But when she was alive, at least she knew I did impersonations of her. And that's a good feeling when you tell that to a star. And then instead of being like, oh, big deal, they feel like, thank you so much, I appreciate it. They seem to be very appreciative that you care enough to do a tribute to them on the stage. So that's a good feeling for me anyway.
Yeah, that would be very special to have somebody who you look up to have a positive response to you. Because I know personally, if I were to ever meet any of the people I really look up to, and I'd be super nervous that they would respond negatively. So it's nice to know that your interactions with the people that you've impersonated or looked up to did receive everything positively.
Because a lot of the performers nowadays, I'm sorry to say that, but I hear that they are not very nice to their fans, and when they leave the stage, they don't want to talk to anybody. They in fact, they tell the security guards, we don't want to talk to the fans. But in Judy Garland's case and Olga, they love talking to the audiences after the show, and they would feel hurt if we didn't go to say hello to them. Nowadays, many times, they won't even let you get an autograph. But talking about autograph, I got to meet Liberace when he played in the Bay Area at the Circle Star Theater. And after the show, through his manager, I got to talk to him. And I said, I work at Finocchio. Oh, yeah, I've been there many times. He said, I need a facelift, David. I'm getting a facelift because I'm going to do a show in Radio City Hall. And he gave me, he sent me they took a photo of he and I together. I don't know why I forgot to say to him, Liberace, can I have one of your handkerchiefs or any of your old coats that you don't want anymore? Because he was very nice, and I'm sure he would have said, oh, yeah, I can give you a handkerchief, something, a momentum of his. I forgot. I don't know why. But I did get to talk to him. I have photographs of him with me, and I understand that he did come to Finocchio's. Unfortunately, not when I was playing there, but before my time. So anyway, but I got to see him. And then I guess about 2 or 3 years later, he passed away.
Yeah.
So
that's really cool. So I want kind of shift to one of the things I was really curious about, because we did talk about costumes a little bit, and unfortunately, Holly White doesn't have her costumes anymore. But I wanted to ask you about your costumes, because I've seen a lot of really beautiful pictures of all the amazing costumes that you and the performers wore, and so I want to know, did you end up keeping any of those?
Some of those costumes, unfortunately, I don't fit anymore. I used to be as thin as asparagus, but I did give my friend Jacques Duran, who lives in South Africa. Paul used to know him too. He's a Dutch roots guy in his 40s. He's in charge of my Facebook page, and he's in charge that when I die, he'll come over from Africa to grab my Judy Garland memorabilia and try to send it to some kind of museum in London or Paris. Anyway, when he came here, he came at least 4 times to this country. After Paul died, I gave him a lot of my boy and female costumes from Finocchio's. I said, you keep them in case you want to have a little room about me when I die. You'll have something from Finocchio. I gave him my makeup mirror from Finocchio's, and I did keep some at my home here from Finocchio's. Now, of course, since that time, when I started working in the 90s and 2000, I bought different costumes, not from Finocchio, but I do have a whole closet of beautiful costumes here, especially for the Judy Garland act. So I do have some here, and I keep them there. I did a show last year. It's called If I Could Turn Time Back. That was my comeback because I didn't perform on the stage for 6 years after Paul died, and I wore some beautiful jackets. It was more like a unisex type costume, but some of those beautiful jackets I wore, and it's on YouTube. It's called If I Could Turn Time Back, my premiere. That was a very nice show I did. And Jack came all the way from Africa, and he filmed it. That he had never seen me perform live, so he said, I must come while you're still alive so I can see you perform live, because he only seen movies of me. So he came and with a friend of his, Isabel, which is a lady from Holland, 2 Dutch roots, and he took videos of me and it's on the air. So whenever you air this interview, he said he's going to put it on my Facebook page and put it on my so-called YouTube channel to archive it there in order for people to see it, So I'm glad I got somebody to help me, because now with Paul gone, if it wasn't for Jack Duran, I'd really be in trouble because he's archiving everything. I said, anytime I take new photos of me, I said, here's some new photos. Here's something new. And he keeps archiving it over there. I said, you must have a huge room. He said, oh, no, this goes into flash drives and whatever they call it nowadays. So he's got all kinds of things on me.
But, I guess kind of shifting from the past to today, I'm interested to know what kinds of things are you up to these days?
Well, recently I tried to do, I did last year that big concert at the theater. I told you if I could turn time back. Then in December, a lady by the name of Ninon de Rosa, she came with her crew to my home and she interviewed me, which is on YouTube. And before that, a year before, she interviewed me, but not at my home, at a restaurant. Then I I tried to, this year, your interview, and then somebody wrote to me today saying that they're coming to Las Vegas in a month from now, and they are writing a story about the 70s and the 60s and the 70s, and they saw my website, and they would like to interview me. So I said, well, at least by doing interviews that go on YouTube, it will keep me alive, so people know I'm not dead. But I try to go myself. I go every day out to eat, and I take care of my pets, and I clean my house. I go to, last night, a friend, an acquaintance of mine took me to see on the Strip a tribute to Karen Carpenter. So I try to go to see some live shows, to keep myself entertained. But it's very difficult because when you are alone with your partner and you have to go like a third party with somebody, it's never the same as when you had your partner with you. But like I said, I'm not just the whole day crying here. I go out and I do things, The trouble is that in this town, I see a lot of entertainers who cannot get jobs performing because the lounges are gone and there's very few places to perform. There's no nightclubs open. And so in order to do shows, it's not as easy unless you are in a big review like Cirque du Soleil or one of those big shows. But the other performers who are not in those shows, they have a hell of a time. And they have to go and, drive to Phoenix or whatever to other states to do little gigs. I'm not going to be driving alone nowadays with a pole. So I try to do things if I can locally. And at least doing interviews is good because when you do a show, unless you film it, it's gone forever. Nobody can see it. At least when you do an interview and it's on YouTube, it will outlive me. So if I can do a few interviews, fine. If I can do another show, it would be nice to do another show here in town, So I try to keep busy as much as I can.
Yeah, it's definitely important to keep busy. But I don't want to keep you too long, so I'll just ask one more question. So I just want to know, do you have any advice for the young performers of today?
Well, the problem with my advice is because there's a big generation gap. If I tell somebody, listen, you should bring your makeup down, you should bring your wig down, they'll say, oh no, David, this is all hat. This is not the way we operate nowadays. I don't think they will take any advice. The only advice that I could give, which is eternal, is make sure if you want to be in show business that you have talent, not just pretty face because that will disappear, and that you will have a thick skin to take criticism, and make sure you have the people who can help you in the business. Because if you could be very good, but if you don't have a good manager or somebody who can get you into a position, be a movie or be in a nightclub, you are stuck. Like, for example, let's say a Cirque du Soleil. If I was an acrobat in my 20s and I would have a connection in that review, they would say, well, why don't you audition? They would put you in. So connections are very important. But, unless somebody is, they like old school, the new generation of boys in drag, they're completely different from what I was. Because by the time I became working in drag, the big performers of that era were dying. So I became the young generation from the old generation. So I picked up all these things from them and I carried them with me. But since the 80s, well, Finocchio's close in the 90s, things have changed so much that I don't think any of these kids will take advice. But
I'm sure I think he's still solid advice, though. I think there are definitely people who are interested in hearing from the original.
Hopefully somebody like you, who has an open mind, who do appreciate the things from the past, then but nowadays you tell people Frank Sinatra or Shirley Bassey, and they will say, who? If you don't talk about the people they know, like Taylor Swift or Beyonce, you say, do you know who Ella Fitzgerald is? To a black guy, he says to me, who is she? I said, well, she was a famous black singer. Do you know who Diane Carroll is? Who? They don't know. So you're talking to a generation which I don't understand, because when I was 18, my mother taught me who Joan Crawford was, who Betty Davis was, and these were older actresses in their 60s, and I was 18. I knew who they were. But nowadays, unless somebody has been taught at home to watch Turner classic movies, they have no idea who Vivian Leigh is and all these old actresses. Well, they may know who Betty White is because some people have seen the Golden Girls. But other than that, they don't know the stars that I got to meet in person. They don't know. In fact, the other day I said to somebody, I met Tony Curtis. He said, who is Tony Curtis? I said, Tony Curtis is a very famous actor who was in a movie with Marilyn Monroe called Some Like It Hot. She says, oh, I didn't know that. I said to myself, what am I going to do? What am I going to do if I had to explain to people? That's why when I did Judy, and I saw some people in my show that were young, I would say, by the way, Judy Garland died in 1969. And then somebody said, oh, she's dead? I said, oh, yes. That's why this is a tribute. And I said, and Judy did more than The Wizard of Oz. She did many, many movies. Oh, really? They had no idea. The young ones that came to see me. Now, the older ones, over 40 or 50, they knew. So my mother used to say to me, you're more like a teacher, because when you're doing Judy, you're explaining things. When I would do an anecdote about Judy and Marlene Dietrich, and I'd say, by the way, Marlene Dietrich was a famous German actress that Judy knew, so people would know what the hell I was talking about. Otherwise, it would go over their head and say, who is Marlene? So that's a generation gap that is a pity. They don't teach history anymore. I mean, theatrical history like that, to have somebody explain who were the singers of that era so people would learn. They don't. When I was in school, we had music appreciation class, and my teacher would teach us about the opera Carmen or the Bohème or whatever. So we were taught about different things that we didn't know. But in the 60s, they taught that. Now I don't think they have any music appreciation class anymore. And if they do, they would talk about rap. They would talk about the all-stars, like Gene Kelly, Mickey Rooney, and Miller, all those people that performed Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, all those old people that I knew, because when I was in my 30s, I saw them. I saw Ginger Rogers. I saw Peggy Lee. I saw a lot of these performers who are dead now. I got to see them and meet them in person. Even Chita Rivera, who just died, I got a picture of her autographed to me because we met in San Francisco. So I was very lucky then to have met a lot of these people. Susan Summers, I met too. I mean, a lot of these people I got to meet either at Finocchio's or when they were playing in San Francisco, and we went to see them perform.
Well, hopefully through interviews like this and through your stories, more people will look up some of these people and learn more about them and about your career. But I just want to thank you again for speaking with me today, and it was really wonderful getting to know more about you and your career and all your memories.
Well, let's keep in touch via email, and if someday we can do something else, we can talk about my spiritual beliefs, because we can talk about spirits and UFOs and different things that have nothing to do with the theater, but things that I am into spirituality. So I'm a very spiritual person too. So there's other subjects I can talk about that has nothing to do with show business. So we can keep an open road going and keep moving along. Thank you so much for the interview, and it was wonderful hearing your voice. And I hope someday, while I'm alive, I can get to see you in person and say hello.
I hope so too. Thanks again. I hope
God
you have
bless.
a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
La perdición de los hombres, la que miente cuando besa, ya lo saben, yo